afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar.
Good afternoon to everybody. Hope your week's going well. My name is Russell Edwards. I work for Aptem as an account director. And what that means in practice is that I spend most of my time with the largest providers in the sector. And that's around understanding how they operate at scale and I guess where those real operational pressures sit. So my role in today's webinar is to bring that context into the conversation and show how Aptem is shaping its platform to support the way delivery is evolving. Mike, if you'd like to do a short intro, that'd be great.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Mike Sims, and I work part-time as a consultant for Aptem. So during the other part of my week, I work as a technology and AI consultant directly with training providers. So I've kind of got that very fortunate position of being able to understand both the challenges that training providers are facing sort of on that day-to-day operational basis, and to work with the teams at Aptem as we look at providing those solutions to those kind of complex, industry challenges that we all face. I've got quite a strong understanding of the Aptem platform, having previously worked as the Chief Product Officer for Aptem. And so I'm really pleased to be here today to sort of share some of the ideas on the art of the possible using Aptem's AI enhanced features.
Thanks, Mike. That's great. So I'm just going to work through a quick couple of slides. I'm not going to PowerPoint this session to death, but I think it's important that I just kind of give you some framing before I hand back over to Mike and he walks you through how that looks in practice in the platform. So I just want to use this slide because I suppose what I want to do is anchor on the core of what Aptem already does for apprenticeship delivery. We may have some of those people on the call today that currently use Aptem or evaluating Aptem or just wanting to understand more. So Aptem Apprentice is that full end-to-end platform, and it's designed for regulated vocational training at scale. And I suppose the observation is from the conversations that I have that many providers today are constrained because those core processes sit across multiple systems, spreadsheets or manual workarounds. So inside your organizations, what that will do, the consequence of that is that it will create costs, inconsistency and risk. And Aptem, I suppose, in answer to that, was built to unify that into a single coherent operating model. So this is what you're seeing on screen. This is Aptem's standardized infrastructure that everything else sits on top of. And I think the important thing here is that once that foundation is solid, that's where the real transformation starts. It gives you the environment where things like automation or AI and in general modern delivery models can take root. So what you'll see on screen now are the capabilities that will materially change things like workload, consistency, and scalability, which are now compounded by Aptem's AI early work. So my reflection here is that taken together will allow providers to evolve their operating model. And it's not just that kind of digitizing existing tasks exercise, it's really an evolution in how you can deliver. Before I hand over to Mike, Aptem's AI features can help reshape that learner journey, but in a way that strengthens rather than replaces coach-led delivery. I suppose the key point here is that these tools sit inside the flow of learning and assessment, and that helps those learners build clarity, confidence, and then importantly, supports momentum in between those coaching touch points that naturally happen over the course of delivery. At the same time, the system provides coaches far better visibility of progress, risk, and need. So instead of learners waiting for availability or coaches spending time on low-value tasks, the technology being Aptem triages, guides, and services what matters most. And I think for providers, this creates a delivery model that is more focused, consistent, and financially sustainable. So just kind of stepping back from some of those observations, the net effect of all of this is a more resilient operating model at a time where many providers are under real pressure, reduce cost per learner whilst also improving quality and compliance. And that, as you know, is a big ask. So what Mike will now walk us through is, I suppose, the beginning of a different way of delivering apprenticeships, albeit a human in the loop model that maintains the central role of the coach, but uses embedded AI as a genuine lever for efficiency, quality, and scalability. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Russell.
That's okay.
So what we're going to do is the majority of our session, we're going to focus on the application of Aptem's AI features within the context of learning delivery. But before we kind of get into that, what I wanted to highlight was some opportunities where can be used, some of those AI features can be used within the onboarding and enrollment journey. So we're going to sort of focus on that initially. And before I start sort of taking you through that, what I'm going to do is just bring up a diagram which helps to kind of explain what I'm going to set some of the context before I sort of show you in the system. So here I've got basically an example process sort of diagram for sort of the onboarding and enrollment sort of stage or part of the journey for an apprenticeship. Now, it's an example way of how you might go about taking an applicant through an onboarding process for an apprenticeship, bringing them onto program. And the reason I say it's a way is it's because obviously Aptem is incredibly flexible, so your process might not look exactly like this. I wanted to kind of show and explain this at a high level before we sort of look at this in practicality in the system. So just kind of walk you through what we've got here. So obviously you'll understand the concept of we create an applicant record in the system, so create that user, invite them to register, and we've got here an onboarding program that we would put a learner onto to maybe carry out that initial assessment stage of the applicant information. At that point, we would want to review that information, to review the information they provided and any assessments that they might have undertaken with the aim of determining their suitability or eligibility for an apprenticeship. And at that point, if they were, if we sort of felt that they were suitable and eligible to continue, we would then maybe move them onto a delivery program where they might complete a sort of second stage of enrollment, providing more detail, and then we might do some compliance checks. We might then go through and make some adjustments to their training plan where appropriate. We might issue the agreements for them to sign, and then they're sort of into learning. So hopefully that sort of high level overview kind of makes sense to everyone listening in as a kind of a concept of a way in which you could utilize Aptem within the platform. Now, what I wanted to do was focus in on this applicant initial assessment stage here on our onboarding program, and then that review of that information. So what I've got here is an example, which I'll just switch to now. So this is an applicant that I've got here where I've already registered them for sort of ease and sort of saving time in terms of demonstration. So they've received a link in an email, they've clicked on that, they've gone through and registered, they've created their passwords, and they've also created their digital signature. And so what we're doing here is on this initial sort of assessment stage, we're wanting to capture that information about that individual that allows us to assess their suitability or eligibility for an apprenticeship. Now, I've created a number of steps that you can see down the side here, sort of 9 steps down this onboarding steps on the right-hand side here. But that could be 1 to 5 steps, 1 to 7 steps. It's ultimately sort of up to you in terms of how you design that process. Again, down to Aptem's flexibility within that. I would always kind of recommend the idea of sort of keeping it engaging though, so not just about form filling and assessment, but use it as an opportunity to tell the learner about you as an organization. So I've got a fictitious training provider here called Avon, just a bit of information about that. Obviously, with onboarding programs, you can also create ones that are bespoke to an employer if you really wanted to, so you could include videos and things like that for them. And then we would go through the process of capturing the information through our custom forms, custom questions, that sort of thing in here, or using the out-of-the-box questions that Aptem provide aligned to the funding rules. And I've also put in here a skills radar in here. Now here's one that I've created with a custom set of questions, and this is like a team leader pre-screen, where what we're doing is asking some questions which might flag a reason why this learner, particular applicant, might not be suitable or eligible for the team leader apprenticeship. So an applicant would go through and fill this in. They'd complete things like their maths and English, their education history as well. Maybe, for example, go through and complete cognitive assessment using Aptem Assess as well, so that we've got that learning support assessment or the cognitive assessment to use for the learning support purposes. So applicant goes through and fills this information in, and what we would then want to do is we want to review that information. If I just switch here now to the admin view, so I'm logged in here as an administrator, and what you can see is I've got my record here for Noah. And I've created a review called an initial assessment check. So it gives me the opportunity to go in and review the information that Noah's provided. So I can see the answers he's given to those eligibility questions. I can see how he's scored himself on that skills radar, and I can view all the other bits of information within here that might be useful for me to look through. And what I would do is typically as sort of an enrollment officer or compliance officer would be go through and maybe answer some eligibility questions. And I've just got some really simple examples here to illustrate the point, but obviously you would have your own set of kind of questions that the person carrying out a review of this applicant's information would go through and answer. So what I want to do is, as I've said, it's identify whether they're suitable or eligible for this apprenticeship. And in here you can see on this skills radar, Noah has flagged that he is a 6 out of 6 he's rated himself 6 out of 6 from his self-assessment in relation to managing resources to deliver tasks within budget and targets. So I wanted to highlight there's a few great features within Aptem that provides the ability for us to go through and do something with this record when we identify a flag like that, because this 6 out of 6 might indicate that actually there's a need for prior learning adjustments. Or we might find that this team leader or apprenticeship is not suitable for now. Maybe he should be on an operations level 5 or something like that, ops manager level 5. So in terms of how we could do that, well, one of the ways that we could go about doing that is we could, in this particular example here, we could go through and back on the view screen here, we could actually go and schedule this particular review. We can actually convert it into a Teams meeting. And what that will do is that will create a Teams session that gets dropped into my calendar. I can then go to my Microsoft Teams and I invite the applicant, and if I thought it was appropriate, I could invite the line manager. And then what we could do is we could go into this review and I could ask questions during that team session. I could ask questions of Noah, check his understanding of this, so I can go through and sort of validate that. And it might be that I find actually he's misunderstood the question. I can record here that he's not understood that. So I could go through and do that and log those changes, and you can see here that I've logged a tutor's assessment or coach's assessment of that learner and provide that information. Now, one of the great things, because we've got that Teams integration though, is that what that allows us to do is if I was to record that team session, because of the Aptem's integration, it allows us to, it's a two-way integration, and what it would allow us to do is pull back the transcript for this particular Teams meeting. So we've got the transcript, and what it can then do is we can use the AI feature in Aptem to go through and summarize what we discussed during that meeting. Now, what that does is that means that it saves significant amount of time. So as I'm going through and recording all of that information, it can help me to go through and capture. So it's going to pull through that transcript. I've got a recording of that. I've got the notes all written up and summarized for me, and can save maybe half an hour of me after that meeting completing a write-up. So that's one way in which you can use that AI summarization within review summarization within Aptem, basically sort of speed up that process, save that time, that administrative function of writing up following a discussion with a learner, with an applicant about the information that they've submitted as part of their application for an apprenticeship. Of course, there are a number of other ways we could deal with that as well. So we could obviously create a skills radar where within the skills radar, we could set this up so that we invite this sends out a notification to the employer, a line manager, asking them to go through and complete this. So we could ask where the learners self-assess themselves at this level. We could ask the employer to go through and assess the learner's level of competence against each of these points as well. And then moving on, another approach that we could take is we could use a new feature, and that's checkpoint. So of course, you'll know that checkpoint isn't a new feature per se. However, checkpoint has been recently added and made available in our onboarding programs. So what that means we can do is, in this instance with Noah, we can see here that on his skills radar, he has rated himself in relation to managing resources as 6 out of 6 on our particular scale. Obviously, it might, it's your scale might be out of 5 or out of 10, whatever it is. So what we can do is we can go to Noah's profile, and in Noah's profile, we could create a checkpoint that we want to enter in, and we can specifically choose a particular standard. And we could say what we want to do is ask a number of questions of Noah in relation to in relation to resource management. So we can go through and select the relevant criteria and generate a set of questions for Noah to go through and complete. Now, what that looks like for Noah is if we just jump back, he will have a checkpoint notification asking him to complete multiple choice questions within that assessment process. So it'll ask him to go through and answer these questions, and I'll just quickly go through and select things at random just to highlight the point. And what that does is that's then going to give us that feedback on how much does Noah really understand when he's rated himself at 6 out of 6. So what that gives us an indication of is another mechanism for assessing the learner's competence, where they've self-assessed them, where they've gone through a self-assessment against a particular set of kind of criteria or subjects or topics or the knowledge, skills and behaviours. We can go through and create an assessment for that applicant to complete to allow them to demonstrate that competence. In this case, obviously, 0 out of 4 indicates that although Noah thinks that he might be a 6 out of 6, it's giving us that indicator of actually there's still that basically he doesn't have that level of understanding that he would need for us to potentially make adjustments for prior learning and remove aspects of the curriculum in response to that. So there's a few different ways there just kind of run through in that onboarding process in terms of how we can address that. So an applicant provides us with their feedback on how confident they are, their level of competence against a set of knowledge, skills, behaviours, or against a particular criteria set in a skills radar. We might have custom questions that we ask of them as well within all of that. And so we can review that information in a number of different ways where there are outstanding questions. We can schedule a Teams meeting, invite the learner and their line manager if we wanted to, and we could record that Teams meeting, and then we can automatically pull back that transcript and use the review summarization feature in Aptem to summarize that discussion. We could obviously invite a line manager to go through and complete a skills radar to assess that learner's capability as well. And then finally, another AI feature we could use is the checkpoint mechanism in the onboarding process, specifically creating one relating to the criteria where the applicant has indicated that they have a level of competence that we want to check or validate through that assessment process. So that's our sort of process, kind of looking in the way in which we can use the Aptem Enhance features to save time as we're going through and assessing the suitability and eligibility of an applicant for a particular applicant individual. So to move on then into kind of learning delivery, I'm just going to jump ahead here to the learner. I've got a learner here, Harvey, and I've put Harvey onto a team leader program. I've just created a basic sort of example of a program. So you can see in here we've got a first day in learning, and then every 12 weeks we've got a progress review. And the way that I've built out this team leader apprenticeship program is I've sort of followed a flipped learning model. So you can see for each topic there is an activity to go through and do some self-guided learning, so e-learning, work through that, then followed by going through and doing a workshop where maybe a tutor delivers to a number of learners, where that would build on the learner's knowledge they've developed through self-guided learning that they've completed. And then giving the learner an opportunity to demonstrate their understanding of the sort of knowledge, maybe skills that they might have developed through those activities, an assignment. So for each kind of topic, I've got that sort of repeating pattern here of, in this first case, budget and resource management. You've got the e-learning, then the workshop, then the assignment, and then on to the next topic. Now, obviously, your programs will look very different, but just using this for illustration purposes. So here, if I just kind of go into our e-learning, so Aptem provides the ability for you to kind of upload engaging, interactive e-learning content through as SCORM format. You can upload to a particular activity multiple SCORM resources, so multiple SCORM files. You can also upload video and sort of web content and PDFs and that sort of thing for people to read through. But I've got an example here of just a SCORM asset developed using AI. So this is a module talking about performance management, where a learner might work through each of these activities, and they would sort of either read through the information here, or they might watch a video where it sort of covers off going through performance management, or listen to a podcast through that. Or even with these days, you can go through the process of, you can do things like embed avatars, AI avatars, where they can chat through with you a particular topic as well. So Aptem provides a great platform for you to do these kind of things. So a learner would go through and obviously work through these resources. Now, it might be that as a learner is working through this, they have questions and they get a bit stuck on some of the content within here. And that allows me to sort of introduce you to the virtual assistant. So within Aptem, virtual assistant is always available there for the learner to ask questions. So if I'm struggling on a particular topic within performance management, I can ask a question of the virtual assistant at any point in time. And critically, the virtual assistant is available 24/7, so it's always there, available to the learner to use. And that's really useful for maybe some apprenticeships where it might be in hospitality or care, where there's shift work going on, and so you not necessarily always have staff immediately available to answer questions, so coaches immediately able to answer those questions. And the key thing is obviously a learner has logged into the platform to do their learning at this point in time. If they get stuck with something, they have to wait for a response. And obviously then once they've got that response, they've then got to find another time where they've got available to continue in their learning. So what we want to do is encourage learners to, when they come to do their learning, that they can progress and continue with that learning and get it done at that point in time when they have that availability. And that's why virtual assistant is so useful, not only in sort of saving time for a training provider, but just being available at every point in time whenever the learner needs it. The virtual assistant knows the apprenticeship program that I'm on, so it's got that context. So when I ask those questions, it has an understanding of that. So let's say I've kind of gone through, worked through this resource, maybe ask some questions to the virtual assistant if I needed to, and I complete my learning. So I've worked through and I've completed that digital learning piece here. Now, the way I've set up this particular programs is that once I've completed that learning plan activity, as a learner, I'm asked to complete a checkpoint. A checkpoint is another one of the Aptem Enhance features that basically provides a bank of multiple choice questions. The learner is given a number of those questions to complete after completing a learning plan activity or after completing a period of learning. So the way I've set this up is that this particular managing performance learning plan activity is mapped through to this performance management techniques within the standard. So because it's mapped to that, what happens is when I complete that activity, it then creates a checkpoint for me to go through and complete. Those checkpoints are available, can be scheduled and set up on a periodic basis instead. So every sort of month or 2 months, I can have it ask me to do a checkpoint of all the learning, covering all of the learning criteria that I've completed up until that point. But this one I've set up for the particular activity. So it generates some questions for me to go through and answer. I'll try and do my best to get some of this wrong. Hopefully I'll get at least one wrong. I'm sure I have, if not both. Oh, brilliant. There we go. One right, one wrong. So what Checkpoint does is, for me as a learner, it's providing that self-assessment. It allows me to self-verify the learning that I've gone through until this point. So I'm asked questions, and where I get it correct is obviously indicating that I got it correct. It's also providing me with sort of, this is the answer you gave, but critically, this is an explanation of why this was the right answer. So I can look and review that. And then even more importantly, where I've got it wrong, what it does is it provides me with it provides an indicator that I got it incorrect. It's showing me the answer that I gave, and it's explaining why that isn't correct. It's also showing the correct answer, and it's providing me with an explanation of why that isn't correct. So why that's the correct answer. So this is really helpful for me as a learner to check my understanding as I go through the process. And what it also allows me to do is, this has also been integrated with a virtual assistant. So if I'm looking at this and I'm still not 100% sure why mine's not the right answer or why that's the correct answer, I can ask the virtual assistant for help to explain that further. And the virtual assistant is given all of the information of that question, all of that context into that, and helps and goes on to explain it further. And so I can interact with the virtual assistant. And ask further questions, and until the point where I've got that understanding of it, helping me to kind of verify my understanding of it and correct my understanding as I'm going through and develop that understanding. So that's Checkpoint within the system. Now, what we could then do within our sort of learning plan is we could have it mapped. I've done where, so after I've done this e-learning, it might be that I then go on to do a workshop, could go in and enroll myself onto that workshop. And then if it was an online workshop, I can join in through a Teams link within Aptem. It might be that I've set this up. So what that then does is then that asks me another checkpoint question where it's sort of going through and potentially building on covering some more in-depth set of criteria. So the knowledge and maybe the associated skills, so that I can again start to continually protect my understanding of the competencies that I'm developing as I work through those learning resources. And why all of this is particularly important for training providers, it's not just about helping the learner understand where they are up to. Fantastic thing with all of this is then we make all of this information available on the learner record as well. So if we go to this particular learner, Harvey, we go and look in his profile, we actually have this insight into all of the checkpoints that he's completed, and we can look through all of the results of everything that he's gone through and done and check his understanding of each of these elements to see what question did he ask, what ones did he get right and wrong. So as a coach, the reason this is really helpful for me is that if I'm maybe doing one-to-one coaching sessions every month, check-ins with the learner to talk through how they're getting on and how they're progressing in their learning, This gives me that insight into what does the learner understand and what don't they understand. So instead of maybe in that one-to-one coaching session, me spending lots of time asking questions of the learner to check all of these things, I can use this body of evidence to identify the things that they are struggling with, and then maybe focus that session on working through and helping them with that, giving me more time in that session to do that. And of course, all of that information then, as Aptem evolves and makes that available through data, will provide some really meaningful insights. So we could look at and analyze this data to say, for example, we have identified that maybe all of our learners are struggling with to answer questions related to K07. And what that can give us is an indication that maybe we need to address something within our curriculum. It might also highlight in some cases, for example, where a caseload belonging to a particular coach, that their learners on K05, for example, knowledge 5, their learners on average not doing so well against all learners answering questions in relation to that. And that highlights professional development needs. And so what we're able to do there, whether it's a change in curriculum or whether it's providing some professional development work with one or more coaches, it allows us to not just impact these individual learners by looking at how an individual learner is getting on, but it allows us to make improvements within our business, that within the organization, that is going to help to drive improved quality and operational performance and success across our learners at scale. So that's Checkpoint, your virtual assistant, and Checkpoint. Now, once we've maybe gone through and done that, so gone through and done some e-learning, we've attended a workshop, we've gone through and completed our checkpoints as we're going through and doing that, then maybe what you might have a learner go on to do is complete an assignment. Now, I've got an assignment here that I've already completed for a learner. So the learner has gone through, they've basically answered 4 questions, submitted their assignment. So I'll just jump back into the learner's administrator view here and click on this particular assignment. So you can see here, I've got a mark exercise button down here. And if I click this, it will launch our marking aid user interface. So within marking aid, basically what it allows us to do is set up assignments within our program of learning for learners to go through and submit written responses to questions. Marking aid uses a type of AI called classification AI. So that's not large language model AI. It's not generative AI. What it's doing is it's learning from the way in which your coaches mark work. And as it learns through your coaches marking that work, and over a period of time and number of submissions being provided by learners and marked by your coaches, it will start to generate what we call a first pass mark. So this is Marking Aid's done that for us in this particular question. So I haven't marked this. This has been done by Marking Aid. And what Marking Aid does is it highlights parts of a learner's answer. It provides a combination of constructive feedback and positive feedback. It will score based on sort of how the grade structure is set up for this assignment question. And so it will have a go at marking this learner's work. And as it does that as well, what it will do is it will apply, you can see over here, a confidence factor in that piece of feedback that is given. Now, as a coach, I can go through and I can make edits to that. I can remove that feedback. I can make edits to the feedback given. I can remove feedback where it's not appropriate. And as I do that, Marking Aid will learn from the way that I'm doing that. We'll take all of that into account, and it will help it to improve with its marking capability the more and more I interact with it and sort of make those adjustments. So what we'd expect over time is that this feedback gets to high 90s across the board. And the reason this is so important is because from a training provider's perspective is that research suggests that 1 to 2 days a week of a coach's time is spent marking work. So if we can kind of make an impact in terms of reducing that, as well as ensuring, obviously, that you're getting detailed feedback for a learner, helping ensure that there's detailed, comprehensive feedback, but also making it an efficient way of doing that, and that can have a huge impact for a training provider. Finally, I just wanted to kind of run through then reviews. So reviews, and I kind of alluded to this within the applicant enrollment process, but within progress reviews, we have the ability for you to schedule these as a Teams meeting. So every 12 weeks, for example, schedule these as a Teams meeting. Now we can set these up to kind of capture things like ask learners to complete information in advance. So we can add these custom sections. Same for a line manager, so we could get them to complete this in advance of the review taking place. We could also ask them to rate themselves or how they think they're doing against the skills radar, so we can see that sort of progression over time. But if we utilize the Teams integration, what that allows us to do is, again, use that recording functionality that's available within Teams. So if we record that session, we can pull back the transcript from that automatically into the platform, and we can use the AI feature to summarize that. Now, research suggests that about half an hour takes about half an hour to do the write-up from reviews. And so, for example, with one training provider that I'm aware of, where they've got about 7,000 learners, they're doing 4 reviews a week, or 4 reviews a year, so one review every 12 weeks, and that's 28,000 reviews a year. And if it was taking half an hour to write up those reviews, if it's saving that half an hour in doing that after every review, that's 14,000 hours of time saved. So it's a significant impact that it can have on an organization. Additionally, I am aware of those organizations that are using the reviews functionality for coaching catch-ups, so one-to-ones between learners and their coaches. Again, those sessions, what that can do in terms of saving time. So if you've got a caseload of 45 learners and you're doing those one-to-one sessions with each learner every month, and that is saving, say, a further sort of half an hour of time. That's another sort of 23 or so hours per month for a coach, which again is significant efficiency saving that you can get from that. So those are kind of the different ways in which you can utilize kind of all of the AI features that are available within the platform. So the virtual assistant, checkpoint, marking aid, and review summarization and feedback assistant within Aptem, and the sort of areas in which you can utilize it and ways in which you can utilize it to gain some significant efficiency savings there. Hope that was useful. Russell, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. That was fantastic. I love how you joined everything together in the kind of flow of learning and everything that sits around that. Let me just share my screen a second. So can we all see my screen that says any questions? Have I shared the right screen? Great, thank you. So we've got a lot of questions that have come through. I'll just pick out a few key ones, and for those that have asked any that we don't cover today, we will of course come back to you more broadly after the session. But there are some great questions that have come through. Mike, in your experience, given your background, how do learners typically respond to AI-driven checkpoints and guidance, in your opinion?
Sorry, say that again, Russell?
Sorry, how do learners typically respond to that kind of AI-driven checkpoint and guidance piece, i.e. not being the tutorial coach in system?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that checkpoint, for example, is a really handy tool for me as a learner to double check my understanding, and it maybe highlights areas where I need to go back and do that learning. And the same, and I guess kind of with virtual assistant, it's the convenience of having it there rather than having to wait for that sort of answer back. I think I've had lots of discussions with people where there's been this concern around the preference maybe of kind of whether learners will really be keen on interacting with with an AI chatbot, for example, rather than a coach, and losing that human connection. And I think that what I've identified is actually it's a complementary thing, is not a replacement. So I don't think that a chatbot is going to replace a coach, a tutor in performing that role, and I don't think learners particularly want that. What I have seen though is that learners find things like the chatbot and the checkpoint is a confidence developing tool. So in both cases, it's an opportunity to ask questions to check their understanding, utilizing either the virtual assistant or checkpoint, or sort of both, which means that when you come to have that conversation with their coach, they're more confident in holding that discussion. So if that's, say, a professional discussion, they feel prepared for that professional discussion. Equally, if it's going into a workshop with a group of other learners and they're expected to contribute to that session, having that opportunity to maybe ask some questions of the virtual assistant, or to have gone through and verified their understanding with checkpoint, means that they feel much more confident to engage in conversations with their. So my experience is that actually, and the feedback that I've had directly from learners is that they actually enjoy the opportunity and really appreciate the opportunity to interact with an AI, where there might not be that sense of judgment or fear of kind of speaking out in front of an audience like a workshop. So it's that sort of tool that helps them gain in confidence around their competencies and understanding of the topic.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mike, and well-rounded. Just a quick question on checkpoints. And there's 2 separate questions here, but I'll put them together because you can cover it off in the round. So kind of question 1, are the checkpoint questions pre-populated? And are you also able to explain on how and when those checkpoints can be triggered?
Yeah, absolutely. So the checkpoint questions are pre-populated, so they're not generated on the fly when a learner kind of completes an activity. We don't sort of generate using like ChatGPT, like large language model, at that point in time. And the reason for that is that whilst large language models are great, there's a possibility that they could create something where the question is misleading, or the options available aren't misleading as well. So the way that they're done is that they're generated in advance against a particular standard. They go through a quality assurance process, and then they're then made available. So a number of questions will be available for each knowledge skill behavior for every single standard, and the system will randomly select a number of questions depending on your configuration and present those to the learner for the learner to complete. Built within that is the opportunity to provide, there's sort of like a thumbs up, thumbs down, and there's a review process built into Aptem where if things are getting flagged as we don't think this is a good question or have good answers, that feedback comes through to Aptem, and adjustments are made to ensure that those questions and answers are appropriate for that particular competency in the standard. And and then to go on to just cover off in terms of how you configure the checkpoint. I might just steal back the screen if that's all right, Russell. So
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Let me do that.
So these things, it's just easier to see.
Indeed, yeah. So I'm logged in as an administrator here. I actually have I have the role that allows me to manage tenant settings. So if you have that role, you'll find a settings section located in your in the left-hand main navigation. And here is all of these kind of areas where you can manage these kind of enhance features. So there's checkpoints. We've got things like process automation in there. There's the virtual assistant in terms of configuring when that's available. Enhanced review settings as well. So for checkpoint, what I can do is I can switch on these periodic triggers or automatic triggers, and then you can expand out the settings to configure one or more periodic configurations. And so there are a series of settings through here that allows me to define the number of questions, the frequency, and so on and so forth for periodic configuration. It's relatively similar for the automated ones. So again, within here, I can create a program set. So I can give it a name, choose a number of programs, be that one program or multiple ones, maybe leadership and management, or all those at level 3 or level 5 or whatever it is, and again go through and make those settings and configure those elements within there as well. And that will then use that as the basis. So in this case, with automatic triggers, once I've gone through and completed that activity, it will create that checkpoint for me to complete and surface a notification asking me to do that.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Just got another one here, which I've got some thoughts on, but just kind of round it out for me. So if our organisation's policies prevent us from recording Teams meetings, will this impact the ability for Aptem to generate transcription? So I'm kind of assuming in that question that the question is in the context of being able to transcribe but not necessarily record. So what are the alternatives or options for generating transcription outside of a recorded Teams meeting?
Yeah, so within reviews, it's possible to upload a transcript. So if you have a transcript file, you can directly upload it into it and then ask for it to be summarized. So that's possible. So, I mean, there are certain instances where that might make sense to do that in terms of downloading a transcript. There might be something that was discussed in terms of sensitivity within that where you might want to remove a section of a transcript. It's not appropriate to include, remove that section and then upload that into that edited transcript into the platform, and then ask it to summarize on that basis. So for a number of different reasons, it's possible to upload that. Upload as long as you've got transcription, either transcription element enabled or got a transcript file, you can utilize that feature.
Thanks. I've got one question here that is around SCORM assets and some challenges with their current provider. But are you able to provide any recommendations around any software to create SCORM assets, given your view of the market and what tools are being used?
Yeah, so I mean, that one that I used there was a product called Educated On. There are other tools. So I mean, Articulate Rise, I think, has an AI feature built into it as well. So yeah, so there are a variety of different sort of options out there, depending on specifically kind of the need there. But that's one of the fantastic things with generative AI, is that really it opens up the opportunity really for developing, I suppose, historically where content would be, we'd build curriculum or a program to be very generic to cover a wide audience because it's so time consuming and costly to develop curriculum. Now with AI, it can be developed a lot more rapidly, which means that you can tailor it to to specific audiences, and you could build multiple versions of a curriculum to different audiences. For example, an adult care worker where it's tailored to those people working in care homes or hospitals or care in the community or in the home. You could have all of those different versions very quickly developed, rapidly developed, and with such engaging content like you might have seen there in terms of easily and quickly create videos, podcasts, so that there's different ways for the learners to engage with the content. And Aptem is just a fantastic platform for surfacing that kind of content, because it just using a combination of those things really creates a brilliant learning experience with all of those elements like the virtual assistant checkpoint alongside that.
Thanks. I've just got one more question for today, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll make sure that those others get covered off. So this question, Mike, is in the context of coaches. So where are coaches seeing the biggest time savings with Aptem's AI tools? But before you answer that, I suppose more broadly, given the conversations that I have, it's kind of that's linked to providers kind of trying to deliver that high quality and also be cost effective, because those two things are materially linked, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got to accept the fact that there's real challenges in terms of funding hasn't really moved forward in such there's not been any improvement in funding for a very long period of time. The cost of delivery has only increased, and so there's a lot of challenges for providers out there. And so these features really have always Aptem has prioritized features specifically for the coach role, because predominantly training providers, the majority of kind of where you can see AI having an impact is where you've got the most people within your organization. So if you can save coach a day a week of their sort of time, the impact that can have on learners in terms of improved quality of teaching, so they've got more time with the learner, they can spend more time mentoring and supporting the learner, they can spend more time thinking through that delivery aspect with the learner. That's going to have the biggest impact. Obviously there will be AI features kind of coming from Aptem in the future that will focus on other areas like compliance and other aspects, but it's where it can have the biggest impact, and we're seeing that. So I mentioned an example there where review summarization, saving half an hour per review for an organization delivering 28,000 reviews a year. That's such a substantial number, and and then if you were to factor in there the coaching sessions into that as well, it really starts to be significant. But all of the areas where Aptem have focused developing these AI features has been looking at what are the admin tasks that coaches are spending their time doing that's taking them away from the important job of supporting learners, interacting with learners, and coaching learners through their learner journey. So writing up notes, so helping them prepare for a review session, marking work. And the challenge is without these tools, what ends up happening is that you end up in a situation where maybe learners don't get as much detailed feedback on the work that they've given, on the work that they've submitted, because of time constraints for a coach. So, and as much time talking through and explaining concepts to learner where they're struggling with certain things because of the need to fill in information, tick boxes, or go and ask questions to check their understanding. So I think in every single aspect of kind of marking work, summarizing reviews, checking a learner's understanding, they are all having huge impacts across the board for a training provider in driving efficiencies. This is not just about kind of, for me, it's not about kind of just cost cutting, saving time. This is about helping to drive quality by reducing the admin and basically freeing training providers up and coaches up to do what they do best, which is the teaching and learning.
Fantastic. Mike, thanks for joining us today. That was great. A great set of questions to go with it. Just as a summary at the end of today's session, if you're interested in learning more, there's a colleague of mine, Sean Baker, delivering a detailed walkthrough of Aptem Apprentice next week. And as an organisation, we're also running a series of lunchtime sessions for our AI-powered marking aid in more detail. Behind that series, I guess, is webinars. What we'll do is we'll take you through features step by step. So if you're new to Aptem, you may find that the introductory session on marking useful to understand how it works in practice. You can also register now for the next update from our product team showing the developments in the Q1 2026 roadmap. Mike, thanks again for giving up some of your time today. Thanks to everybody for attending. That's fantastic. And again, any questions that we've not covered off, we will do in due course. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care, everybody.